Are you interested in discovering the spiritual and theological mysteries of the Old Testament, as well as exploring the current historical and archaeological evidence that supports or confounds the biblical narrative? If so, prepare to have your eyes opened as we journey to Damascus. Hello there. Welcome back to Journey to Damascus. As you can see, I've got quite an interesting group of guys here behind me. These are the mighty men of David. They're going to be watching over us here and watching over me as we get started on our story. They are a part of the last chapter that I'm going to try to get through today in half an hour, so we're going to really move along quick. So I want to be sure to be able to tell you all about the mighty men of David. We ended up last week by finishing up chapter 19. If you'll remember, David was returning victoriously to Jerusalem, but some of his troops were kind of arguing amongst themselves, particularly some of the troops from the army of Israel who had been a part of the insurrection with Absalom against David, and David's troops from Judah and the men of the army in Israel were saying they should be accepted back because they were just following orders and they should get full recognition, and the men of Judah were kind of not so sure about that. So there were some arguments that ensued, and that's where we pick up chapter 20. So we're told in the beginning of chapter 20, there was a man by the name of Sheba. Sheba, we are told, is a troublemaker. Apparently he had a bit of a reputation there. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. He blew his ram's horn and started to taunt some of the troops of David's from Judah as a part of, at the end of this argument they had had. And he started singing a little song saying, "Down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Come on, you men of Israel, back to your homes." Can't dance to it, but there it is. All the men of Israel army gather up and follow Sheba back to their homes, back up into the northern parts of Israel, out of the area of Judea where they were, and blah, blah, blah. And so David and his troops and his followers continue on, cross the Jordan, and are preparing to enter into Jerusalem. Now there's people coming out of Jerusalem at that same time to meet him there beforehand, particularly people who had kind of sided with Absalom while he was in Jerusalem. And so some of them are coming forward to lay low, bow their heads down, and affirm with David that they are on his side and all for him. And we always were. Absalom was just here, but it was you. You were the man. You're the guy we were hoping would be back here again. First thing David does when he gets back into Jerusalem is take care of the concubines of his that he left in charge of the palace, who Absalom had humiliated in public, you might remember. So he takes care of them and makes sure they're all right and gives them their own place to stay. And next he finds Amasa. You remember Amasa? Amasa had been one of David's generals, but when the insurrection started, he became Absalom's top general, and he was in Jerusalem when David came back there. You'll also remember that, let's see, David should, I know there was, I guess it was actually back in chapter 19 when Amasa and David got back together, and David said, just to show there's no hard feelings, I will make you one of my generals again, because you are a relative. He was Joab's brother, who Joab, you remember, is David's main general. And so David reinstated Amasa back as one of his generals. So he calls on Absalom when he gets back in town, and he tells him, I'm going to give you a chance to prove yourself back to me. You have 3 days to pull together my army and get them ready to march. Well, then we're told that 3 days go by, and Abishai has not gotten the troops together and organized yet. So David turns to his main man, the man who's always been there for him, the guy who has always provided and been a great general for him. That's Abishai. Abishai is a great warrior, and we're going to hear more about him towards the end. David calls on Abishai and tells him that he knows that Shabbat is going to be more trouble than Absalom was, and that Shabbat is going to try to put together an army and challenge David once again. So he tells Abishai to pull together what army is around that area, David's personal bodyguards and the army that was right in that general vicinity, and for him and Joab to take the men they've got and head out and start heading towards to catch up with Shabbat and to destroy him before he can put together an army, before he gets into a walled fortress city where he can hide out. So Joab and Abishai pack up their men and get on the road, and they're picking up more men as they're traveling along the road. They head out for Shabbat, and they get to a spot where the great stone of Gibeon is located. And I'm going to stop there for just a second and take this opportunity to talk to you a little bit archaeologically about Gibeon. The city of Gibeon is featured much in the Bible. It's located here in this picture. You can see there's a mound in around the middle there, and that's the old city of Gibeon. You got to remember, these cities were built one on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, tear down, destroyed, piled down, built back up, new cities built. And so over time, when they once got abandoned, destroyed at the end, they're just a mound. They're just a mound of crumbling rock and dirt and archaeological artifacts that archaeologists go back and that's what they dig through. You can see the city around it has grown up over the years, but the mound has been left, and that's where archaeologists generally do their work. These mounds that they find, they generally call them tells, T-E-L, and it's just some word for a mound. So, Gibeon is mentioned, like I said, throughout the Bible. Also, the famous location of the Gibeon Pool. I'm going to show you the Gibeon Pool right here. You can see that this was carved in solid stone, some 90 feet deep, about the time of Solomon. We'll be reading about this a little bit more when Solomon's in this town. They believe this to be the Gibeon Pool and Spring, which is featured throughout the Bible, through into the New Testament. 90 feet deep, stone steps carved into the side of it, so as the water table goes down, you can go down the stairs all the way as low as the water gets, and as the water comes back up, obviously you come down less stairs. So that would put this pool as being some 900 years old, that this was carved nearly 3,000 years ago. This pool is shown in this next picture as it looks today. This is just the entrance to the pool. The last picture was from when it was excavated in the 50s. This is how it looks with just this little bit of vegetation around the top of it here. This would be the entrance to that spring today. So like I said, Gibeon features in many places in the Bible. It's also where God sent the deadly hailstorm and stopped the sun, so Joshua could continue his battle with the Amorites. You see that right here. This is just a wood carving of Joshua doing battle, and the sun stops in the sky and allows for him to continue on the battle and end up slaughtering the Ammonites. real interesting development just recently. And in this next picture I've got for you here, you can see Colin Humphreys right up here. He's a British physicist and director of research for the University of Cambridge in England. He, along with Graham Waddington, wrote a paper because they had been doing some research on what we call, okay, let me get here, annular eclipse. Here's a picture of an annular eclipse here. An annular eclipse is one in which the sun is directly behind the moon. The moon settles into the direct line of the center of the sun, creating this, I think the word might be parabola, or this light, this fiery ring that shows up all the way around the moon. What is interesting about this is that Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Waddington discovered that there was an annular eclipse that passed over the area of Gibeon on October 30th, 1207 BC, which would be somewhere near in the timeline of what biblically we would expect to be the time of Joshua's battle at Gibeon. So as the Bible says, the sun stopped. Professors today have determined that this feature was in the sky somewhere about that time. I just find that kind of interesting. Would this look like the sun had stopped? I don't know. Anyways, just kind of interesting that they found by doing their math and research that there would have been this looking sun visual at the time of 1207 BC, the time of Joshua, right over Gibeon where he was supposed to be battling the Amorites. So, interesting stuff. Okay, let's get back to our men of David, our men of David here, and get back to our story. So, Abishai and Joab come to the great stone of Gibeon, as I told you, and there they find General Amasa, the one who David had given 3 days to get the troops together, and apparently failed at it, or stalled at it, or wasn't enthusiastic enough. However it was, David and Abishai and Joab were not happy about how Amasa was doing. And so as they see Amasa, Joab goes up and approaches him and slips a dagger out of his waist and greets Amasa and grabs him by the beard and stabs him in the stomach in a rather gruesome manner, apparently, and kills him right there on the spot, leaves him laying in the road. Apparently, everybody standing around, the troops that Amasa had already either gathered for David or maybe for other purposes, we don't know, were kind of just blown away, left standing there staring at Amasa bleeding out in the road. So one of David's men turns to all the others there, the men that Amasa had gathered, and said, who's for David? Who's going to go on with us, follow Abishai and Joab, and continue on after Shabbat, and who isn't? Kind of a threat, maybe. And they are left standing around staring at Amasa bleeding out in the road, and apparently even the young man who called that out realized that this wasn't really the best way to ask for help going after Shabbat, so they end up dragging Amasa off the road and covering him with a cloak or blanket, and at least showing some respect for the man at that point, at which point the rest of the troops say yes, they're all in, and they will follow Abishai and Joab after Shabbat. So they take down tracking after Shabbat again. Meanwhile, Shabbat is running for his life through Israel. He is passing by city after city, knowing in the back of his mind, whether he's been told or he can just feel it, that David's army with Joab and Abishai is closing in on him. So he and his people, particularly the people from his tribe, are moving all the way up, trying to get as far away from the troops that are pursuing them as they possibly can. and they travel all the way through Israel and get to Abel Beth Maacah. Now, I got a map here, Abel Beth Maacah, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but at the very, very top of Israel, there's 3 little dots up there. This is where this town is, and Shabbat runs as far as he can north in Israel before leaving Israel to get away from this army. And he can't get away, and he doesn't want to leave Israel, so he slips into basically the last town he can, Abel Beth Maacah. And he comes on into the town and gets the doors, the gates closed in. It is a fortified city. And they get in there, and the troops of Abishai and Joab catch up. Archaeologically, we have found that at Abel Beth Maacah, there was a fortified city there that was well established in the 9th century BC. Joab and Abishai and their men chase them all the way into there, and then they start to build a siege ramp to get up and start battering on the walls of the city to get at Shabbat and his men. Well, about this time we are told that a woman whose name we're never given, she comes to the wall and she asks for Joab to come to her. And Joab finds out, and they bring Joab to her. And she asks, is this Joab I'm speaking with? And he says, yes, it is. And she chooses her words carefully, and she says, I am known far and wide as a wise woman, somebody who is skilled in settling arguments. I have a natural gift for settling arguments. So please tell me why it is you want to destroy our city. And Joab tells her, look, I don't want to destroy your city, but I will destroy your city because I want the man Shabbat, and I will not settle for not getting him, and I'll tear the city down to get him. And the woman says, well, like I said, I'm good at negotiating skills. Let me go talk to the city elders and see what we can do. So she goes to the city elders, and she puts her best negotiation skills to work and says, I think we ought to cut off his head and throw it over the wall and give it to him. So they do. So this next picture, which is an old tapestry from France, actually. In this tapestry, we can see that the people of the city are handing Shabbat's head over the wall to Joab, and that's her way of settling the argument. Apparently it worked pretty good. They did end up killing all the men who were Shabbat's relatives, and because they were also part of his army, but this put the whole thing to rest. And Joab and Abishai and the army and everybody were satisfied, and they all went on back home. So the town was spared through some shrewd negotiations. Okay, that gets us to chapter 21, where we find there came to Israel about this time a famine to all of Israel, and apparently it's gone on for 3 years before David turns to the Lord and says, Lord, why is this famine here on our land? Well, how can I get rid of this famine here? And God tells him that way back, the Gibeonites, we're back to Gibeon again, the Gibeonites, back when Joshua was coming through the land and establishing it as the promised land and fighting Amorites and Philistines and Hittites and all the Moabites and everybody to wrestle the land free. After he had destroyed Jericho, you might remember that the Gibeonites, who were not Israelites, fooled Joshua by coming to him dressed like travelers from far, far, far away, and he made a treaty with them, only later to find out that they were only a 3 days walk, and that they had kind of fooled him into signing a treaty with them because they knew the mandate from God was to destroy all the people who were in Israel. And so Joshua honored that treaty, and this was supposed to be a treaty for all time. But under Saul in his zeal for Israel had decided to kill the Gibeonites and had actually murdered quite a few of them. And God tells David that the famine is because God isn't happy at the way the Gibeonites were treated under Saul, and some kind of restitution needs to be made in order for the famine to be lifted. So, David turns to the Gibeonites, goes to them, and says, I know that you've got taken advantage of, your treaty was broken by Saul, my predecessor. What can I do to make it right by you? And the elders said, well, you know, there were many Gibeonites murdered. Money isn't going to do it. They said, I know that we can't ask for the life of any Israelite, but technically Saul's family are Judah, from the tribe of Judah, and really what we think would be fair is that we want to execute 7 of Saul's sons to wipe the slate clean. To which David agrees, kind of surprisingly. But I guess there's a famine throughout the land. He figures 7 guys, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. So he does spare, I thought I would never have to say this guy's name again, but it just keeps coming back to haunt me. Mephibosheth, here we go again. Mephibosheth, I should have left it at the one. I'm going to say it a few times. Mephibosheth. He spares him because he is Jonathan's son, and David had promised that he would take care of Jonathan's family. But 7 other men are picked and are executed by the Gibeonites, and and when this happens, a woman by the name of Rizpah. Now you're going to remember Rizpah. She was the concubine of Saul, whom after Saul died, Saul's general Abner was accused of having slept with her by his son Mephibosheth. And that's what got Abner irked with Mephibosheth. And if you remember, he threatened to help David bring all of Israel against Mephibosheth. And he ended up eventually defecting to David, but being murdered by Joab because he had killed Joab's brother. But that's where Rizpah comes from. And she, in this picture you'll see here, this is an ink drawing of her, as we're told in the Bible that she sat with, 2 of her sons were picked to be executed. She sat with the 2 boys and the other men who were picked, and for weeks defended them by day from vultures and other birds of prey from getting to the bodies. And also she fought off wild beasts, we're told, by night to protect the bodies. And let's see, how did that end up for her? Let me find here. And so when David learned that Rizpah had been doing these things and protecting these bodies, he felt remorse over what he had to do, and also felt good about her. He obtained the bones of Saul and Jonathan, which you remember, I don't remember the town they were in, but they were taken down off of a city gate and by a group of men and put in their town. He got those bones, and he ordered that all these bodies, these bones from these men and Jonathan's and Saul's bones to all be picked up and put in Saul's father's tomb. After that, God ended the famine. Wow, this reads like a script from an epic drama, doesn't it? This is getting to be good stuff. And it only gets better because we are about to hear about the battle with the giants. I kid you not. Hold on, maybe you want to stop right here and get some popcorn or something, because this is fixing to get really good. So as if all this wasn't enough, we've come to the Philistine giants. So about this time, when it seems like everything's good and everything's going cool in Israel, here come the Philistines again. Whenever there's a little lull, we can always count on the Philistines to start kicking it up. So during a battle in which David was engaged in hand-to-hand combat, he becomes weak from the battle, from fighting for so long. And he gets close to complete exhaustion, to where he just can't fight anymore. And that's when Ishba-Benob, we're going to call him that, Ishba-Benob, it's kind of fun to say, Ishba-Benob, the Philistine warrior who we are told was a descendant of the giants. And he carried a huge spear, that the spearhead weighed 8 pounds by itself. And he was an expert in hand-to-hand combat, and he saw that David was getting weak, and he moved in, and David was helpless. And he was right there, and he was just about to kill David when Abishi comes to the rescue and comes riding in on his stallion. Well, at least that's what this picture shows. And he kills Ishba-Benob at the last second, saving David's life. Whew, that was a close one. After this, David's men declared, "You are not going to battle with us anymore. Why risk us snuffing out the light of David?" So as far as I know, David never went to battle with the men anymore after that. Abishi did a great job, and David's men fought many, many battles, we're told, one after another. The next one being at a place called Gob, G-O-B. At this battle, Sebeke, an Israelite, killed Saph, a Philistine warrior descended from the giants. In another battle at Gob, Elhanan of David's army killed the brother of Goliath of Gath. Remember, who David himself had killed as a boy, his brother. Then once in another battle with the Philistines at the city of Gath, David's men encountered a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And he defied and taunted the men until Jonathan, son of David's brother Shemiah, killed him. The writer then informs us that these 4 giant men were all descendants of the mighty giants of Gath. However, David's warriors were able to kill them all. So that brings us to chapter 22, which is kind of an unusual one. We're entertained, the whole chapter 22, we're entertained by David, who sings a song which I will not sing to you. It's a song of thanks and adulation for his God, who has watched over him and provided for him all of these days. All in all, the song is made up of 49 biblical verses. And like I said, I'm not going to read through them. You might want to read that yourself sometime. Either way, we should sometime read that. And if you really want to know how to give thanks to God, this is a great example of it, because David does it really well. So how's our time right now? I'm not too sure. I'm going to ask my director here how I'm doing on time. Okay, so 28 minutes. So that's pretty much our half hour. I was hoping to get to chapter 23, but I don't want to ruin it, and it's a great chapter. It is all about, I showed you the mighty men of David right here. It's all about them and the groups called the 30 and the 3. The mighty men of David, the 30 and the 3. I'm going to have to tell you about them next time. So I hope you've enjoyed our Sunday school for today. This is my pleasure to bring these to you, and we appreciate you watching them on our Journey to Damascus Sunday School series. We'll see you next time, and if you'd like to read ahead, be sure to look at chapter 23 and read a little bit about the mighty men of David, and otherwise, if you don't read ahead, I'm going to tell you all about it next time. Thank you. We hope you have enjoyed our discoveries for today. Please join us next time as we explore the insights of the Old Testament on the journey to Damascus.